Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Proof Talks, where we unpack real world expertise through the stories, decisions, and lessons that help shape professional judgment. I'm your host, Ashley Smith. Today's conversation starts with the challenge many leaders eventually face. You've hired capable people, you want them to think for themselves, take ownership, and solve problems. But somehow, every important decision still finds its way back to you. At first, it can feel like a people problem, but sometimes the real issue isn't capability at all. It's a culture of dependence that has quietly formed over time. Today, I'm joined by Dale Turnbull, a leadership strategist and creator of the 7 Positions of Leadership framework. Dale works with leaders and organizations to build cultures where people take initiative, think independently, and contribute with confidence instead of waiting to be told what to do. His work focuses on one of the most overlooked aspects of leadership, the idea that the way a leader shows up every day can unintentionally shape how much ownership or dependence or independence their team develops over time. In today's conversation, we'll unpack the story of a senior leader whose team had become overly reliant on them for direction and decision making. We'll explore what Dale noticed beneath the surface, why the problem wasn't what it first appeared to be, what had to change, and what leaders can learn about creating the conditions where people are empowered to step up rather than wait to be led. Dale, I'm really happy to have you here. Welcome to Proof Talks.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Before we dive into this client scenario, why don't you unpack things just a little bit further about what you do and what your role is when you're stepping inside an organization to help them figure out how to make some changes for a new positive direction?
So ultimately, the first thing is what actually is the problem? Now, a lot of the times when I've worked with companies, they're normally companies that either have expanded too quickly, they've expanded too much, or they're looking to expand, but they know there's certain bottlenecks within the business and organization. And a lot of the time, with a lot of rapid growth, having worked within a lot of service and sales based environments, one of the biggest challenges comes down to leadership and management. So my background originally, worked in recruitment for the last 12 or so years within learning and development specifically. And what I've seen over and over again as a trend is normally people who perform well, people who are great at sales normally get promoted. That's normally what organizations do. But when they promote people, they don't necessarily have a background in leadership. Some are better than others. But one of the biggest challenges and bottlenecks is, well, how do you know what kind of leader you are? How do you excel as a leader? And ultimately, if you're a business owner, how do you assess if someone has the leadership capabilities and potential to move forward? And what I do is I come into organizations, I help leaders understand, okay, what their individual leadership strengths and weaknesses are, what position they take as a leader. But I work to make organizations and leaders more specifically become more flexible and adaptable, because in today's world, especially with AI, things changing so quickly, the global environment, I truly believe that it's the adaptability of our leadership and our workforce, one, because then they can be flexible regardless of what challenges arise, but also it comes down to how can you make the biggest impact through how you show up. So that's what I do. I come into organizations and work to align the management, but also give leaders a structure to develop themselves, because half the time people are just doing what they think their manager think they should do. And the manager's just saying, well, I did it this way, so you should do it this way. But that doesn't always create the right success for the individual.
Take me to this scenario where you walked in and realized that the leadership was the bottleneck. What can you tell me about the organization and what circumstances they were facing at that time?
Okay, so the company itself, so they were quite a high-performing recruitment agency. They'd grown quite a lot, and because the market conditions were actually quite good, they were scaling quite a lot. They were hiring a lot more staff, and coming from a learning and development background, I was brought in to help streamline some of their processes, help the people develop, and do one-on-one coaching and mentoring with the team as well as the leadership. And one of the biggest challenges that we're faced were with, well, one of the team leaders, but also the team leader's manager, one of the sales directors. And I mean, you've got the whole thing about being a nice guy, right? Everyone likes, well, Does everyone like being a nice guy? I'm not too sure. But that leader who their team loves, right? They love them, they respect them, they think they're a really great person. And ultimately, this is somebody who really takes responsibility for their team. They're somebody who really looks out for them. And the way that would sort of manifest is every month when it came down to the review session, when it came down to were they hitting their targets, were they hitting their KPIs, the manager would often give potential, not necessarily excuses, but they would justify why the person just wasn't quite getting there yet, wasn't quite doing it. So ultimately, the way I like to look at it is he would shoulder the responsibility for the team. It's almost like he was carrying his team forward. But everybody loved him. He was a really sort of great guy, very, very supportive as a team leader. But one of the challenges, I mean, if you imagine like supporting somebody, carrying somebody, like if you think metaphorically like that, if you're carrying somebody, they're reliant on you to get anywhere. So what we would see is in sales meetings or developmental meetings or anything that involved the team, they would rely on their leader, their manager to tell them what to do. Which, I mean, in certain jobs isn't necessarily a problem if it's just like, I don't know, what am I doing today at my work shift at McDonald's? Just do A, B, C, D. It's very task oriented. But when you have jobs that require people to be more free thinking, more creative, more adaptable, what it actually does is it created create dependency on the team to the manager. And he wasn't willing to let them go, actually just let them start to take steps. He didn't start to empower them to do those kind of things. And it created a real bottleneck because he was also the one bringing in the most work and then disseminating to his team. So he was ultimately the central point, and it really kept that team and that element of the business really stuck in place.
Take me back to when you first started working with them. Was there any self awareness around this issue with this manager or any like quietly spoken concerns from some of the people that were working with him? Or was this something that you had to make note of through different signals? Like, how did you understand that that was the issue to begin with?
When I look at somebody or work with somebody, how we work by ourselves is one thing, and how we work as a team, I mean, it's a whole dynamic, it's a whole relationship. And even if you've got a team, not that we should treat people differently, but certain people, certain personalities we naturally gel with, align with more than others. So it's really about looking at the whole sort of ecosystem of that team. I was getting feedback from also the senior leadership. We were looking at the stats and the metrics. So on the one hand, there's the whole intuitive sense based on knowledge. And this is one of the issues with leadership. A lot of the leadership stuff that I hear a lot of senior leadership directors and business owners talk about is all gut feel, which, I mean, a gut feel, I think it's got a huge part in business about feeling into what's right. But what happens if you could extrapolate that? And that's where the sort of 7 positions of leadership I developed came from. But in this situation, I was getting a sense, I was watching his meetings, watching what was going on, and everybody just relied on what he was doing. You could see that if you just looked at the numbers and statistics, all of the business, quote unquote, from the new business came from him as a source. He wasn't actively developing his team. So it was signals from senior management. It was my observations within the environment. It was me looking at the hard statistics and data, ultimately to get a bigger picture of what was going on. And then it's about, okay, well, how do we broach this situation? How do we actually have this conversation? Because, I mean, he wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't a bad manager. He was doing a really great job to the best of his ability, but he was just in this place of such of a lack of awareness. And from senior leadership, you just say, well, you need to get your team performing better, which is just such an obtuse thing. And I'm like, how can we make this more concrete? And how can we start to get things moving? A lot of people think leadership is very black and white. It's like you could do it this way or that way, but there's a lot of shades of gray in it. But how can we start to see that progression to this sort of over-reliance on an individual, a business owner? If everything comes through you as a business owner and everyone relies on you to take responsibility for things, that's a huge block. So how can you start to notice those shifts away to creating a more autonomous team or workspace?
You bring up an interesting point, like how do you broach the conversation? It does seem like a delicate thing to do. Clearly, this person did not have the awareness. They also were liked and a likable person, which might make it more difficult
Yeah,
because there might be a culture of wanting to protect that person even from the team environment.
yeah.
So how do you start that conversation in a way that doesn't get their walls up, their hands up, or like wanting to push back? Like, how do you invite them to have that very candid and open conversation in a productive way?
I think there's no one perfect way to lead. And I also think there's no one perfect way to think. I've studied a lot within human psychology. Some people might be aware of neurolinguistic programming, which is sort of the structure of how we think. And for me, it's every choice we make, every place we come from has positive aspects to it and negative aspects to it. Some people talk about ADHD, people being really scattered, they think about lots of things. That's really great for being creative, for ideation, for thinking about lots of different things in different ways. In certain situations, it can be really overwhelming, really distracting, and someone can lack focus. So what I do is I look at, okay, what are the pros of it? What are the cons of it? And just having that really pragmatic conversation with the person I'm speaking to, because it's not a judgment on who they are. It's not a judgment on how they're doing what they're doing, because I truly believe everybody is doing the best they can with the resources, abilities, and skills that they have. Let's go to a slightly different context so we can mix it up a little bit. Let's just imagine someone is very detail oriented. Like they're the checks and balances, they're the process, they're like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now, there's great pros to that because it looks into the detail, it gets all the minutiae, quality assurance, that kind of role, it's really useful. But if we want to more effectively problem solve, if we want to think outside the box, that way of thinking is not as useful because you're stuck within certain parameters. So I have the conversation. So in this situation with this leader, I was like, well, look, it sounds like you're really good. You're really supportive. You're really helping your team. And I really appreciate that you're really carrying the weight of responsibility for your team. You're carrying them forward. You're bringing in the jobs. You're doing an amazing job. So basically, giving them positive reinforcement for what they're doing. However, the fact that you're carrying them, the fact that you're taking responsibility, well, how much responsibility do they actually take for their work? Could we maybe think about how we could start to get them taking more responsibility? How can we start getting them to sort of take more steps themselves, start to report to you as opposed to it going the other way? So because I know where they're based, I'm like, how can we start to stretch that leader, to stretch their team? Because going from one thing, well, you need to delegate more, for someone who's never delegated, how do we slowly stretch that person's boundaries so they get better and better? And every time they do start to do it, we give positive reinforcement. Every time they maybe struggle with it, we're there for help and support. So it's really, how do we start to stretch that person's skill set to have a more adaptable way of dealing with their team?
I'm assuming in this particular scenario, you're having a sort of more intimate one on one conversation with that leader. I appreciate what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. But I am wondering on the receiving side, what sort of reaction are you getting from a leader like this when they're hearing it maybe for the first time? Like, are they showing resistance? Like, maybe I never saw that before. And let's use this scenario as an example. I realize it can vary. Help me understand what they're thinking and what their maybe objections may have been, or their appetite to cooperate and like say, hey, okay, let's do this. Like, what are you seeing in those conversations?
If I'm to zoom out slightly, the key aspect I think we've got to consider is, I mean, if we just jump to motivation for a second, we need to understand what's motivating this person. Right? Now, let's just imagine this person loves everybody relying on them. That's going to be a very challenging conversation. If they love having that role in the team, everybody relying on them, they're the central point of everything, it's going to be very challenging. Because ultimately, if that's who that person feels they are as an individual, if that's who they identify with, I'm telling them not to be who they naturally are. So there's going to be a lot of bite back, right? So for me, the first thing is, well, what is their motivation? If they want their team performing, if they want to be successful, I mean, the metaphor, for example, is it's like the bird feeding its chicks. Okay, well, you're feeding your chicks, feeding your chicks, feeding your chicks. Now your chicks are really fat in the nest. They can't fly. And if they were to get out, they would die. So do you want to try and get your chicks to try and fly, or you just want to keep feeding them? So first, it's motivation. If we know the motivation of the person, we can understand, will there be a conflict? If this person loves process, loves doing it the right way, to use the other example, loves that sort of structure to things, if they like doing it correctly and thing and they don't want to be creative, we're going to have some conflict. Then it comes to a broader decision. So whenever I'm looking to develop people or assess, are they of value to this business? Can they do the job that this business needs them to do? My first aspect is, are they motivated in the job? Do I know where they want to go or what they want to get away from? Do I understand what motivates them? So do they actually want what the business has to offer? Two, do they have the skill set available, or are they open to that skill set being developed for us to get them to where we want them to go? Now, some companies, they hire people to do a job, they expect them to have that job. But in a lot of sales, fast-paced, high-turnover kind of organizations, there is a real need for people to want to develop and want to grow. So do they have the skill set and the attitude to take on the training and at least work towards that? And the final part is, well, do I think that this person can do what I need them to do within the relative time frame? And set those things in place. So I can start having this conversation with this manager, and we can use senior leadership as support, and we can work to develop that skill set. But if we're getting more and more resistance, if that person wants to maintain that role, then we need to look at, okay, do we motivate in a different way? Do we push in a different way? Because if we want people to be successful, they need to show up in a certain way. And I think a lot of people avoid those kind of tougher conversations. And I think when people react or disagree or argue with my perspective, I'm more than happy to listen. I'm more than happy to take what they're saying on face value. And also, I'm not attached to being right about it. It could be they tell me something that gives me good information, that gives me good insights. I need to be open to receiving, but then is what they're telling me going to get them closer to actually where we want to go? So this guy, I can use the example, when I first broached it to him, he was quite defensive about it. He's like, oh yeah, well this, well that, well they're not ready. So he's being defensive about giving them more responsibility. So I'm noting that as a leader, but then I can challenge that. So if you just keep doing what you're doing, are they going to grow and develop at a useful rate? What would happen if we just try and do these things? So we can try and push those things away. The other thing is, it's always great when a leader goes on holiday to see what happens with their team. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that we can do, but I think, especially when you're talking about how people show up as who they are, it can be quite delicate. But I think as long as you demonstrate the value of who they are and how they show up, but the sometimes challenges of that behavior, and then look, well, can we find some other solutions to be a bit more flexible? People become open, because I'm not saying it's inherently bad. It's just we can maybe do some different things.
Tell me a bit about what kind of transformation you saw in this particular organization. Like how did things change in terms of the actual results? But then how did you get there? What happened to this leader? What did they do?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a bit of a roller coaster. I'm going to be honest with you, as many things are in business. But yeah, ultimately, it was a case of me pushing him, pressing him to give his team more responsibility, to take more of a lead, to actually, as opposed to him having to get everything from his team. Like, if let's just say you're the one who carries all the responsibility as a business owner, get people to report back to you as opposed to you going to have to chase them. Give them the responsibility. Don't just say, this is what I want you to do today. I say, what are you going to do today? And then you can guide and develop, and then you set an expectation that they're owning their tasks. And if, for example, and you follow up to hold them accountable, if they didn't do what you said, you can challenge that. And that's not in a, why didn't you do this? It's like, what happened? What went on? Tell me what went on. And then you can more effectively coach and manage. So, I mean, it took a fair few months for him to switch from this, like me taking on ownership from everything, to seeing, okay, what he could start to delegate. We saw his team starting to get in more jobs, being more independent, starting to report to him more, but also it not all being on his shoulders, which ultimately led for a better team, a happier team. Results started to come in. But then the next challenge we faced after that is, okay, so the team started to develop a more positive side, but he struggled having more direct, more challenging, more confronting conversations, which when you're taking responsibility for everything, you don't need to have, because it's not their fault, it's my fault. So the next stage of that was then having conversations about performance, starting to manage people out the business through development, through giving them chances, through working with them. But ultimately, it's about creating a team that works, and a team that is actually bringing value as opposed to just draining money. And for me, it's really about, yeah, can a team provide the value it needs to within the time frame the business needs, or not? And do we see progress working towards that? I'm not one for if you haven't hit this sales deadline 100% by this time frame, we're going to get rid of you out of the business. But it's, are you making significant enough gains, significant enough change to see that it's worth that investment? And this is where the whole discernment comes in. But yeah, overall, they became a lot more successful. They increased their revenue as an overall business unit and became a lot less reliant on the individual in question. And yeah, overall, profits went up because sales heads went down because we had those conversations. But overall, it was more constructive and productive team.
I'm curious if folks like this individual, especially the ones who are a little bit resistant, particularly at first, but know there's maybe a bit of top down pressure to evolve. What are their first real sign? Like you see them come to you with a first sign of like an aha moment, or, actually, maybe you were right. Like, what are those first signals for them where they go from like apprehensive and resistant to like, actually, yes, I've been thinking about this the wrong way.
So I'm a very hands-on kind of leader and developer of people. So normally I go to the people rather than them come to me. But for me, it's really about that facilitation and being. If you're a leader of people and you're working with people, it's genuinely coming with curiosity. One of the biggest issues I see senior leadership make, or leaders of teams, is they ask why people didn't do stuff. And normally, why didn't you do stuff instantly makes people defensive, or they just give you excuses. So I always go, so what made you choose to do that? What happened? Come with that curiosity and really genuinely try and understand what's going on with that person. Because half of the time, we as leaders make the assumption that the issue we think is the issue is not actually the real issue. But it takes some time, it takes some investment to go into that. One of the other challenges this leader did have is every organization has a culture to it. And this is similarly something people struggle to put words on. If you're in a business, you sort of know what the culture is, but you can't necessarily put words on. And they went from a very familial business, or like when I say familial, it was like friendly, interpersonal, like collaborative, we're all in this together kind of environment. But then it rapidly scaled. And the senior leaders were looking for performance. And I don't know anyone who's tried to get their family to perform. It's just not the same kind of thing. So this guy also came into a very family friendly, family organized, supportive environment. And as the business scaled, it changed internally the dynamics within the business. So he was an amazing leader 2-3 years before and was of real value to that business. But as the leadership scaled and grew and the culture changed, as much as senior leadership said they wanted to keep it the same, it really wasn't the same culture. I mean, you don't fire your sister, your brother, your mother, your father. You don't do that. You don't have those conversations, and you avoid a lot of stuff. But when you're building more of a vehicle that's taking you somewhere, really going places, you've got to have a whole different way of thinking and a whole different mentality. And these things happen underneath the structure that nobody effectively communicates to people. And that makes the challenge even harder, because it's like, I was doing a great job and now I'm not doing a great job. The company's grown, so what? But why is there a problem?
Yeah.
So there's multiple layers and facets to it.
I can absolutely see that in a scaling environment, especially if it started as a smaller enterprise. I wonder a little bit about that piece where folks who are in this sort of position, if they ever really think much about how this style might limit their own growth in terms of their own ability to graduate into something else or climb the ladder or whatever, because they've created an environment where they don't really have a proper succession or systems in place where like they can even be replaced. Like, are those kinds of conversations happening? Do you talk to people about that?
So I can actually share about some of my own experience and one of my own frustrations, to be honest with you. So when I was working within the learning and development function at my first main recruitment job, I was growing, I was progressing, I learned NLP to tailor my communication, I got better. I invested, I think I paid like over 10, 12 grand when I was like maybe mid 20s, so a fair whack of money
Yeah.
to develop myself, because my organization, great as it was, couldn't teach me, couldn't tell me how to do stuff better. There's nothing more frustrating. I was in my appraisal, I was doing well. I really wanted to move up. Now, I got given the space of the environment. There might not be opportunities. They didn't want to promise. So I fully got that, right? But I'm like, what do I need to do to be better? How can I grow as a leader? How can I perform better? And my manager said, just keep doing what you're doing. Hated that, because and it's not his fault either. He did not have a system, a structure, a framework to teach me how I could become a better leader. And this is where the 7 positions that I mentioned comes up, because I think it was maybe 6 months later, my previous manager, he moved to a different office, and a recent colleague of mine, he got promoted above me. And I'm like, why? I got really annoyed, really frustrated. Now, in comparison, he was a process guy. I'm not. I can process, but I'm not a process lover, right? I like working with people, less with processes. And he come from a process background, very structurally oriented, and he was the best person for the job that they were looking for. So I've got no qualms with him getting that job. But if my manager at the time said, Dale, you need to get better at understanding processes, structures, organization, if he was able to tell me that 6 months prior, would I have been in a better position to have taken that step up, because I'd have learned the skill sets involved in being more that way? So this is, I think, what it comes down to. It's people are unaware of, okay, leadership is such an abstract term. How can I make it so I know how I lead? What other ways there are to lead, so I can develop that sort of operational flexibility? Because then you can take ownership for yourself to develop yourself. But also, if you're a manager or leader of people, you have a framework to see how people develop themselves as leaders.
I really appreciate the conversation. I hope listeners are taking in some of this nuance and recognizing that there is not a one size fits all, and that the challenges that people face can look different for different reasons. We've got a few minutes left in our conversation. So while I know we can't fully unpack your 7 positions of leadership, maybe what you can do is give me sort of a summarized overview, particularly leaning into anything we didn't touch on in this conversation. So that way, if folks who are listening, if it sparks some interest, we'll leave some links and we'll talk about that in a moment so they can learn more. So why don't you do that? Why don't you help me understand a little bit more about the framework?
So leadership changes from context to context, from situation to situation, to having a conversation about potentially letting someone go, to presenting in front of an audience, to having an organizational meeting to talk about strategy. They're all different ways of thinking. They're all different ways of showing up. And what I did is, because personality profiles are everywhere, I didn't want to create something like that, because personality profiling is great for awareness of self, but what do you do with it after that? It's like, oh, I'm an INFJ or I'm an IS, depending on if you know DISC or Myers-Briggs. So what I wanted to create is a really useful way of, one, for managers and leaders to understand, okay, what leadership position is their preference, but also have a way to check in. So I'll give you a few examples. So the stereotypical leader is the leader who leads from the front. Leading by example, you've probably heard that term. Now, they're the people who have the vision, they know where they're going, normally the hyper-motivated people. Now, in a sales environment, this is a challenge, because if you're leading the way, if you're taking steps forward and you're going so fast, you might leave your team behind. That's quite a disconnected leader. Salesperson who doesn't develop their team. You've got people a little bit more like myself who are leaders from the background. We help to push people, guide people, very good at helping people become leaders and step into that leadership position. But you need a lot of patience to be in that position. If you prefer up front, you're like, oh, frustrating, just keep moving, you know? So different polarities. You've got the righteous or rightful leader who's good at systems, processes, organization, quite value oriented, doing the right thing. You've got options leaders who like to explore, problem solve, what possibilities are left open to us. You've got the supportive leader that we talked about today, who's very good at carrying things, carrying people, bearing the responsibility. You've got aspirational leaders, people that you look up to, people who deal with a strategy and vision, but they're not necessarily down in the day-to-day workings of things. And you've got the inside leader who's good at networking and connecting to people. So all of these leadership positions have pros, have cons, are good in different situations. But for me, normally people have one or two of like where they're a lot stronger. But it's really about knowing where you're at, knowing what the strengths and weaknesses of those positions, and having essentially a blueprint to know, how can I start to be flexible? If you were to think about in your business life, whoever's listening, is there a specific situation, structure, or context where it's hard for you, it's challenging for you, a nightmare for you, or you dislike it, right? That's probably where your weakest leadership position is. And then either you can choose to develop that leadership position, if like me, you love a bit of flexibility, or you can find someone who can do that job. In accountancy, my accountant is always right. I don't want to be right about my finances. I get my accountant to do that. So we can also look at where we find people to complement our skill sets. And that helps to create a balanced business, team, and framework as well.
That was great. That was very helpful. And I think that added a lot of color to the conversation we just had. So I appreciate you unpacking it a bit. For the folks who are listening, I will make sure to put Dale's website and links in the show notes. I know that you might have some specific places you like to direct people to, Dale. So why don't you tell me a little bit about where, if people are listening, want to get in touch or want to find some value from you, what the best thing for them to do is.
100%. Well, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. So, I mean, they'll be in the show notes. But I'm also putting together a quiz. So you can do this leadership assessment for yourself. So you can get a snapshot into your pros and cons. It's totally free because I want to get this work out there. So you can go for that. And I'll make sure I give that link to Ashley. Or you can connect to me at leadadaptimpact.com. Happy to have conversations.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Dale. This was a fun conversation. I hope people got some value out of it. I'm really enjoying hosting Proof Talks, everybody. So if you're listening and you're new to the show, please do make sure to subscribe, maybe share. We're on audio and YouTube. So listen, tune in, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. This is where we unpack real expertise through talking to the experts. Until next time, have a great day. Dale, you as well. And we'll see you soon.